The story you are about to hear may contain detailed descriptions of intense violence. It will certainly be worse than fiction. Hello, my name is Les, and this is the Worse Than Fiction podcast. Thank you for joining me as we take a look at a true tale of unimaginable horror. Today, I have a story that is a bit different than what you've heard from me so far. It isn't a story of people murdering or torturing others. First, though, let's hear a quick trailer from another podcast called Adulting with Donnie. It's a casual podcast that's great to unwind to, covering just about any topic you can think of. Go give his show a listen. I'll put a link in the notes of this episode.
My name's Donnie, and I host the Adulting with Donnie podcast. I started this show as a way to offload some of my thoughts every week, and I quickly found out that I wasn't really alone in those thoughts, and I was connecting with other people who kind of felt the same way as me. So join me each week as I pour some whiskey and offload some thoughts about news, entertainment, politics, just whatever might come to my head during the week. So that's the Adulting with Donnie podcast, and you can find it anywhere that awful podcasts are served, and also great podcasts.
Now, back to Worse Than Fiction. This is a story about the most successful mass killer in history. The unstoppable Earth itself. This is a terrifying tale of what can happen when Mother Nature brings forth her fury on the unsuspecting populace. It wasn't, however, an earthquake, a tsunami, or a violent storm as you might be expecting. This event was much rarer and has only been recorded one other time in history, but thankfully, on a much, much smaller scale. It was a silent killer that snuck up on its victims unaware. An assassin that moved and struck swiftly and killed her prey without a struggle before they even knew what was happening. So without further ado, let's get into the topic of today's story. I hope you enjoy, if that's the right word for it. On the central west coast of the continent of Africa lies the French and English-speaking country of Cameroon. The geography of the region is varied and includes wet tropical forests, coastal plains, mountain ranges, dry grasslands, and unforgiving desert at its northern tip. The equatorial climate is warm year-round. Cameroon is also home to numerous volcanic geological features, which arc northeast through the hinge of Africa and into the mainland. Among the Oku volcanic field sits Nios, one of 4 ancient volcanoes in the range. About 400 years ago, geologists believed that an explosion occurred on the site of Nios when magma and groundwater below the surface met, blowing out a large crater which would fill with water over the years. Thus, Lake Nios was born. Lake Nios is ringed with sheer cliffs and hills, and water flows over the northwest edge down into the valleys below. The land surrounding Lake Nios is enriched with nutrients supplied generously by the earth as most geologically active areas are. Lake Nyos is, as the crow flies, a little over a mile in length and about 3/4 of a mile wide, and the deepest section goes down to a dark and cold 680 feet. One feature that makes Lake Nyos a rare kind of lake, other than being contained within a volcanic maar, is what lurks at the bottom. The lake is abnormally still, which allowed a monster to grow in the depths of its dark blue water. A waterfall at the northwest tip keeps the water level steady and provides a water source for the valleys below. People in the surrounding villages have also relied on Lake Nyos for many generations as a good source of fish. The active underbelly of the earth below Lake Nyos churned and belched its sulfuric breath to feed this dreadful monster for centuries. The warm surface waters of the awe-inspiring lake held this foul beast at bay until an unknown perpetrator plunged deep into the placid gut of Lake Nyos and unlocked the gate which held the beast from unleashing its might upon the thousands of villagers that lived in the valleys surrounding the maar. The white miasma of death would be freed from its bonds on a calm, clearing night, and with it, hell followed. Nyos Village sits less than a mile north-northwest of Lake Nyos. I wouldn't say it's an isolated village, but the country of Cameroon had only the most basic infrastructure, with many cities being connected by dirt roads that danced and swirled through the lush countryside of the equatorial nation. Nyos Village is a simple community, with very little facets of modern life woven into the day-to-day dealings of the people who lived there. The homes were of simple construction, consisting mostly of brick huts, mortared with mud gathered from the land around them. They were topped with roofs of stick, clay, and sweat. Electricity was found only in the most densely populated cities in Cameroon. The people who lived around Nyos Maar made their way by raising livestock, hunting the wilderness, and farming the fertile soil that Mother Earth provided. Life was simple, though not easy, but these folk knew what had to be done, and they did it. They are a hardy, well-adapted community, living alongside Mother Earth, borrowing the fruits that she offers and paying respect to her when she picks a ripe one of her own. There are several other villages in the area of Lake Nyos, most notably Cha, Kam, and Subum, and the total population of the area was somewhere around 5,000 at the time. The region is mountainous and the terrain is rough to bear, making travel difficult. The closest hospital to Lake Nyos was in the northwest region capital city of Bamenda, which is about 30 miles to the south. Even if the population had access to automobiles, it would still be a lengthy drive through the twisting dirt roads that would have to be traveled to reach Bamenda. What could take an hour or less in more developed countries could potentially take an entire day in parts of Cameroon. Many of the roads are so seldom traveled that plant growth has all but covered them, leading to a slow grind through the mountains. The volcano, Nyos, which has laid dormant for as long as memory has been passed down, was of no threat to anyone that lived in the verdant land around her. Nyos cared not whether the people who lived at her foot were farmer, official, village elder, or child. She sits in slumber, awaiting the day when she spills new ground down the slopes of the rolling hills that surround her domain. She sits and waits this very day for the time that is right to rain fire from the sky and incinerate those that choose to walk the warm ground atop her turbulent belly. 34 years ago, Neos would remind those around her exactly what she's capable of, and despite all of the death she would bring on that peaceful night, it equated to her simply tapping her toes.
We were charged with the responsibility of trying to solve this mystery, trying to figure out what is going on here. Possibly something that has never been seen before, never been documented before.
That was Professor Haldor Sigurdsson from the University of Rhode Island, who had been sent along with a team of scientists to investigate an event that had occurred on August 15, 1984 at Lake Manoon, just 62 miles south of Lake Neos. That event was responsible for the deaths of 37 people as they went about their daily lives. Just 2 years later, on Wednesday, August 27, 1986, a team consisting of forensic pathologists, chemists, geologists, environmental engineers, a doctor, and a limnologist, which is described as a scientist that studies inland water systems, were assembled and sent to Lake Neos. They were to study a geological event that happened in the area just a week before. They reported evidence of a surge of water rising 25 meters that had rushed up the hillside on the southern edge of the lake. The team also had reason to believe that a column of water rising 80 meters had soaked a rock promontory on the southwest side. A promontory is defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary as a high point of land or rock projecting into a body of water. In a word, it's a peninsula, but on a far smaller scale than, say, the state of Florida. I'll post a picture on social media and you'll see that Lake Neos has several promontories that jut out into the main body. The overall level of Lake Neos had dropped by about 1 meter, and a white film had covered the cliffs on the west side. Instead of its normal, rich blue color, Lake Neos had turned an opaque, rust-like color, and it remains so to this day. Evidence of a possible landslide was found on the western side, but they were unable to determine whether it occurred before, during, or after the event. Scientists described Lake Neos as having two distinct layers of water, with an invisible barrier between them. The upper layer was normal, warm, fresh water with no unusual properties. The team believed that the deep water of Lake Neos was capable of reaching gas saturation levels of 5 liters of dissolved gases per liter of water. Samples taken from a depth of just 5 meters effervesced much like a soda does once opened. The still nature of the lake, combined with the warm surface water, prevented the majority of gases from escaping, instead locking them in the depths. That is, until something causes a significant disturbance, causing the layers to mix and resulting in something potentially catastrophic. The team recorded no evidence of seismic activity in the Neos region, and the seismology station in Kumba, about 136 miles to the south, showed no measurable recordings of geological movement. All of the homes in the area were completely intact, with common household contents undisturbed. Even a minor earthquake or a sudden eruption of gas on the lake floor, they believed, would likely disturb fine sediment resting at the bottom, but the samples taken from a depth of 5 meters and below were clear. In the end, they concluded that a landslide was the likely culprit for the event that had turned the once pristine lake into what locals would come to call the Bad Lake. Ironically, the word Neos in the local Mamin language translates to good. Thursday, August 21st, 1986. The time was somewhere around 9 p.m. in the northwest region of Cameroon. In the nation of Cameroon, regions are essentially what most other countries would consider a state or province, an area of the country with borders and its own governing body that is separate from the federal government. Villagers in the area recall glancing at the sky as night fell. The skies over the northwest region of Cameroon are a sight to behold, unlike what most of us in developed countries see. Light pollution is nearly non-existent in Cameroon, and the full glory of the celestial bodies that lie beyond the edge of our world were on full display. The day began with rain and storms bearing down on the region, which eventually cleared to reveal the sky that was lit by a half moon and billions of stars. It was a quiet evening, and the residents in the area were settling in for the night with the pale glow of oil lamps flickering in their windows. Many of these hard-working people were sitting around their cooking fires with family as they cooked or finished the last meal of the day. For nearly all of them, it would be their last meal ever. A rumble echoed in the distance, which some simply wrote off as a storm coming in. There was definitely something rolling in, but no one was prepared for what followed. Some survivors reported seeing water gushing high into the air above Lake Neos. Ephraim Che, a farmer interviewed by Smithsonian Magazine in 2003, said that it sounded like what you would expect a rock slide to sound like. He then saw a white cloud approaching from the direction of Lake Neos, and feeling ill, he decided to go to sleep. Ephraim's family, and many others who had lived in the area for hundreds of years, had long believed that living above the lake was the best course of action. Those who settled in the valleys below didn't take to the superstitious beliefs of ancestral locals. In the interview with Kevin Krajic from Smithsonian Magazine, Ephraim detailed stories that were handed down orally by the elders of his family throughout generations. At some point, though, most of Ephraim's family, including his parents, brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, and cousins, had settled below Lake Neos in Neos Village. Locals had long believed that the lake posed an almost supernatural threat to those living around it. Ephraim recounted a story handed down by his grandfather to the younger generations. It was a local legend about a man that had once parted the water of Lake Neos, much like the story of Moses, and as he was holding the water at bay, a mosquito had bitten him, causing him to lose concentration as people were crossing the bed. The walls of water collapsed, and they all drowned in the deluge and haunt the lake, trapped in eternal unrest. Anthropologist Eugenia Shanklin believes that this is actually the story of a real event that, while exaggerated over the generations, was the same kind of event that had just happened in some capacity. She said, quote, "Details shift over time, but these stories probably preserve real events." The next morning, Ephraim went down to the waterfall that steadies the lake's level. There was no water spilling over the edge, and absent were the normal sounds of nature filling the air. Perhaps the gentle breeze rustling through grass and trees, but all else was silent. He saw that the water of Lake Neos had turned a murky, pale reddish color and took off running along the shore. Within moments, he heard a familiar voice call his name, sounding terrified. It was Halima Suli, a mother of 4, who shouted, quote, "Come here! Why are these people lying here? Why won't they move again?" She described a fierce wind rushing through the night before. Then she fell unconscious. "31 members of Halima's family, along with all 4 of her children, lay dead. The family raised cattle for a living and had a herd of around 400 animals. They as well were all lying lifeless on the ground in a group. It didn't appear that they had been spooked and scattered. They simply fell where they stood. According to Ephraim, no flies buzzed around the corpses of either human or cattle on that morning. Ephraim, shaken at the sight, continued down into the valley northwest of the lake and into Neos village, which had a population of about 1,000 people. Ephraim's parents took residence there, and unfortunately they, along with almost every other villager, would be found dead. Dead bodies were piled in doorways, no doubt startled by the thunderous sound that resonated from Lake Neos, so they looked out to see what was happening. They, like Halima's cattle, died where they stood. Others sat around the smoldering remnants of fires with cookware and food still perched above. Many others died in their beds as they slept. Almost everywhere he looked, he would spot a lifeless body. He believed that the end of the world was underway. In short, Lake Neos exploded in what is called a limnic eruption. This isn't the kind of explosion that rains rock, ash, and debris from the sky, though. A monstrous cloud of gas rose from the lake up to 100 meters into the atmosphere. The miasma then settled and oozed its way into the valleys below at speeds of up to 45 miles per hour. The 50-meter-tall jaws of the beast opened and swallowed every living, oxygen-breathing thing in its path, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. People and animals fell unconscious within seconds, and those closest to the ground and in the lowest lying areas stood no chance of survival. The cloud scoured the earth, starving it of precious oxygen, and strangled the life out of those it enveloped. Its tendrils reached out up to 29 kilometers around the center, killing some in villages far, far away from the lake. The apocalypse had indeed come for these unfortunate people.
Just sitting among the dead people. Inside the house, some of them were outside, some of them behind the houses. Animals everywhere, lying, fowls, dogs, cows, everything. So I was confused by then. All the family, we were 56, but 53 died.
Within days, various organizations mobilized and moved into the area to find survivors and get them medical attention. No one knew what happened at that point, and some governments, especially the US, thought it could be a chemical or biological attack with an unknown weapon. Many victims had blisters and lesions on their faces, which could be consistent with such an attack. An event on this magnitude had never been seen before, but just 2 years earlier, the victims of the Lake Manoon event had shown the same types of injuries. The survivors of the Lake Manoon disaster would also tell similar stories as those who lived through the Lake Neos event. Joseph Anquain, one of the Neos survivors, said, quote, "I could not speak. I became unconscious. I could not open my mouth because then I smelled something terrible. I heard my daughter snoring in a terrible way, very abnormal. When crossing to my daughter's bed, I collapsed and fell. I wanted to speak, my breath would not come out. My daughter was already dead." Reports from those who went to the area to help rescue survivors and tally the dead told an eerie story. Herds of animals apparently died where they stood, and the flies that were expected to swarm the corpses were non-existent. Birds didn't sing, insects didn't buzz or chirp, and as such, the area around the lake was unnervingly silent and devoid of almost all life except for plants and a very small number of people. Nios Village was the hardest hit community, with nearly all of the 1,000 residents suffocated by the white miasma that descended from Lake Nios. People venturing into the region afterwards told stories of bodies, both human and animal, scattered along roads, in village centers, and in the doorways of their homes. All told, the number of the dead was 1,746 people, over 3,500 domestic animals, and an unfathomable number of wild animals. The government acted swiftly in fear of diseases running rampant to get the bodies of the dead people and livestock buried as quickly as possible. A grim task with so many to collect. They were gathered by the Cameroon military, and most were buried in mass graves near where they died. Half of the 40 survivors near the lake that were interviewed described a sulfuric smell, followed by difficulty breathing, dizziness, burning in the eyes, and drifting in and out of consciousness for up to 36 hours in some cases. Most of the injuries suffered were from people collapsing as they went about their normal routines. Most of those in this group also displayed lesions about the torso and legs and complained of nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting. These were the survivors that were closest to Lake Nios when death spewed out and into their villages and homes. The other half didn't notice any smell, burning in the eyes, and didn't have the same kind of lesions. They described dizziness, confusion, and a warm feeling before falling unconscious. Bruising and broken or dislocated bones were reported among many of the survivors, both close to and further away from the eruption. Strangely, every survivor from the village of Saboum, which is 6 miles from Lake Nios, described the same sulfuric smell and eye irritation as those much closer, and some had chemical burns on up to 25% of their bodies. All of the mothers and their newborn babies that were on the second floor of a small maternity clinic in Saboum survived. It was the only 2-story building in the village. The sulfuric smell, reported by many, was believed by scientists to be an olfactory hallucination, since CO2 is odorless. Perhaps this is a defense mechanism that would cause a person to get away from what's causing it as quickly as possible. The testing they had done indicated no sulfuric compounds dissolved in the water of Lake Nios, instead finding that the saturation was nearly 100% carbon dioxide. Lake Nios was essentially a fully saturated soda that had been shaken, then the lid had been popped. All that was stopping it from exploding was the thin barrier of fresh water on top. Breathing air made up of just 15% CO2 can easily be lethal, and scientists found that this was exactly what had roared from Lake Nios and swallowed villages in the region whole. At the brunt of the cloud, people would be inhaling almost pure CO2 and would fall unconscious within seconds, then die in short succession. The few who lived on higher ground made up the greatest number of survivors. CO2 is a heavy gas that, in high concentrations, will stay low to the ground and settle in the lowest points of the terrain. Lake Nios is only one of 3 lakes known to have high concentrations of dissolved gases that could potentially erupt. The other 2 are Lake Manoon, which had erupted just 2 years before Lake Nios, and isn't very far away, and Lake Kivu between Congo and Rwanda, which dwarfs Lake Nyos in size. If Kivu erupted, it would be an unprecedented disaster, and with a population of over 2 million people surrounding it, it would almost certainly be the worst mass casualty event experienced by humans. It's a very real threat, as we saw with Lake Nyos, but on a scale over 2,000 times larger. Evidence has been found of mass extinction events occurring with marine life in Lake Kivu that happen roughly every 1,000 years. The clock is ticking, and it's only a matter of time until the next one. Furthermore, there are approximately 35 or more crater lakes scattered across Africa that have never been tested for gas saturation. Perhaps there is an even greater threat than that of Kivu, but no one knows yet. The eruption at Lake Nyos proved difficult for the impoverished nation of Cameroon to deal with alone. People and organizations came from all over the globe to assist in any way they could. Food and tents were brought in to shelter and feed those who fled the Nyos area. I'll play a short clip, the only one I could find of an official statement during a press conference.
Let us say we are now trying to know what has happened, trying to know what damages have been caused, how many people really must be treated, and how many houses have been destroyed, and so on and so forth. And then we'll make up our mind in order to know what kind of assistance, what kind of help we may be seeking from our friends.
Some 20,000 or more people were displaced from their homes in fear of future eruptions. A team of French scientists secured funding and went to Lake Nyos and Manoun in 1990 to test a pipe designed to release gas pressure in the deep waters. It was a very simple design, essentially just a garden hose lowered into the water, anchored to a small raft. Carbonated water spewed from the pipe, and they knew they were onto something, but the design they tested would need to be scaled up significantly to release CO2 quickly enough to prevent another disaster. Larger pipes were installed in the following years, but it still wasn't enough. Columns of water gushed from the pipes 50 meters into the air. The government of Cameroon was unable to foot the $2 to $3 million needed to build effective venting, but finally, in 1999, the U.S. Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance added to the funding that had been raised, and a much larger pipe was installed in 2001. It still wasn't enough, though. With 5.5 tons of CO2 being vented into the lake from below yearly, scientists still believed that Nyos could build up enough pressure for an eruption. In 2011, 2 additional 5.5-inch diameter pipes were installed, making the degassing process much faster and more sustainable. Today, the water shooting from the pipes only reaches a few feet into the air. Lake Nyos is safe, and people have returned to once again live in the area, but Lake Kivu is another story. One that I hope I don't have to end up doing an episode about in the near future. In that episode, I would likely be talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people killed by the white miasma of death. That's it for episode 6. Thanks for listening. I hope you found it interesting, even if it's a terrifying thing to think about. If you like the show, drop by on social media and leave a like or some feedback. I've put all of my social media links in the show description. Before I leave, though, I'm going to play a promo for another podcast, True Crime from A to Z. Give it a listen. I'll post their links in the description as well so you can find them easily. Until you hear from me again, goodbye.
Hi, this is Sydney.
And I'm Shakira,
We are True Crime from A to Z.
where we tell you the true stories of crimes about the Great White North.
Our show focuses on the crime but pays respect to the victims and their families.
We're so excited to bring our passion project to life and hope you will join us to bring light to these cases.
This is True Crime from A to Z.